The Martian surface stretched out in all directions like a crimson wasteland, its endless expanse broken only by jagged rock formations and swirling dust devils. Valles Marineris loomed ahead, a gaping chasm that cut across the planet like a scar, its depths descending further than any terrestrial canyon. Dr. Lila Trenholm gazed out the observation window of the Argus, their exploration shuttle, as it approached the canyon's edge. Even after months of preparation, the sheer scale of the landmark left her breathless. "This is it," she whispered almost to herself. "The beginning of something extraordinary." Commander Eric Malden, seated across from her, folded his arms and frowned. "Extraordinary, maybe, but let's not forget how dangerous this is. The scans barely scratch the surface of what's down there." Lila shot him a sharp glance. "Dangerous is why we're here, Commander. If this were easy, it wouldn't be worth doing." Eric didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. The veteran astronaut was used to taking risks, but he had learned the hard way to respect the unknown. Valles Marineris had an unspoken reputation among spacefarers, an unwelcoming void where missions often encountered mysterious malfunctions and unexplained disappearances. Despite his reservations, the chance to unlock the secrets buried in the canyon was too great to ignore. The shuttle shuddered as it began its descent. Beside Lila, Mari Vargas, the team's geologist, leaned forward to peer at the jagged terrain below. "Look at those formations," she murmured. "The striations don't match any known tectonic activity. It's like something carved them deliberately." Ravi Nair, the group's engineer and self-proclaimed skeptic, snorted. "Maybe the Martians had a thing for landscaping. Or maybe they were just better architects than you," Mari shot back with a grin. Ravi rolled his eyes but said nothing more. As the shuttle descended, the atmosphere grew heavier with anticipation. The data gathered by drones showed evidence of a massive structure buried within the canyon's depths, something ancient and alien. Lila's mind raced with possibilities. Was it a long-forgotten city, a temple, or something entirely beyond human understanding? The Argus finally touched down on a rocky outcrop near the base of the canyon. Dust swirled around the landing site, and the hum of the engines faded into silence. One by one, the team suited up and stepped onto the Martian surface, their boots crunching against the red soil. Lila's heart pounded as she took her first steps, her visor reflecting the colossal walls that towered above them. The prison entrance wasn't far from their landing site, just as the drone data had indicated. It was partially obscured by layers of dust and rock, but its alien origin was undeniable. A massive doorway, nearly 3 stories tall, stood embedded in the canyon wall. Its surface shimmered faintly, catching the dim light of the Martian sun. "It's beautiful," Lila said, her voice filled with awe. "Beautiful isn't the word I'd use," Eric muttered, scanning the area with his rifle at the ready. "Keep your guard up. We don't know what we're walking into." Ravi knelt near the door, brushing away the dust. "This material, it's not like anything I've seen before. Almost organic, but it's cold to the touch." Mari joined him, running a scanner over the surface. "It's definitely alien tech, no doubt about it." "Can we get it open?" Eric asked. Ravi stood and dusted off his gloves. "There's no visible mechanism, but there's a power source inside. It's faint, but it's there." Lila's pulse quickened. If it's still powered after all this time, it means the systems might still be intact. This isn't just a ruin, it's preserved. As the team deliberated, Lila noticed something embedded in the ground near the entrance. A small, cube-shaped device covered in strange markings. She picked it up carefully, inspecting its intricate carvings. "This might be a key," she said. "Let me try something." Before anyone could protest, she pressed the device against the door. A faint hum vibrated through the air, and the shimmering surface began to ripple like water. The team stepped back as the door split apart with an eerie grace, revealing a yawning corridor that disappeared into the darkness. "All right," Eric said, his voice tight. "Lights on. Weapons ready. Let's move." They entered the prison cautiously, their lights cutting through the pitch-black interior. The walls were smooth and reflective, their surfaces etched with alien symbols that seemed to pulse faintly. The air was thick, carrying a metallic tang that made Lila's stomach churn. It felt wrong, hostile even, but her curiosity overpowered her fear. The corridor led to a vast chamber lined with cells, each sealed with an opaque glass-like material. Lila approached one and shone her light inside. At first, she saw nothing, but then a shadow moved. A skeletal figure, hunched and twisted, its features barely recognizable as humanoid. "Dear God," Mari whispered. "What happened to them?" "They're long dead," Eric said, pulling her away from the cell. "Focus on the mission." As they continued deeper into the prison, the oppressive atmosphere grew heavier. The air seemed to hum faintly, as though the structure itself were alive. Then, in the distance, they saw it, a faint, pulsing light emanating from a small object resting on a pedestal. "Looks like another recording device," Ravi said, approaching it cautiously. Lila reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she activated the device. It came to life with a low, guttural sound, followed by a voice that sent chills down their spines. "To those who find this place, turn back." The words hung in the air like a curse, and for the first time Lila wondered if they had made a grave mistake. The alien device sat on the pedestal like an artifact from a nightmare, its surface pulsating faintly with a rhythm that mimicked a heartbeat. Lila hesitated, her gloved hand hovering just above it. The team had already encountered enough to know that this prison was no ordinary relic of a forgotten civilization. The walls hummed faintly, their alien etchings glowing softly as if responding to their presence. And now, this. "Lila," Eric said, his voice a low growl, "you don't have to touch it. We can analyze it later, when we're back on the ship." She ignored him, her fascination overriding her sense of caution. "It's a recording device. If we're going to understand this place, we need to know what it says." With a deliberate motion, she pressed her fingers against the device. It vibrated softly as though alive and emitted a series of clicks and hisses. The sounds were alien, incomprehensible, but after a moment the device emitted a soft glow. Words began to form in their headsets, translated by their onboard language systems. "To those who find this place, turn back." The voice was unlike anything they had ever heard. Deep and guttural, it seemed to reverberate through their bones. It was the voice of a creature broken by torment, drenched in despair and laced with something darker. Fear. The translation lagged slightly as the voice continued. "We were prisoners, brought here for crimes we could not understand. The architects studied us, tore us apart." Mari instinctively took a step back, her breathing quickening. "Tore them apart? What does that mean?" "Let's listen," Lila said, though her own voice trembled. The glow from the device intensified as the recording played on. They came from the stars, these so-called architects. They wanted to know the secrets of our minds and bodies, to push the boundaries of life itself. They used us as tools, as experiments, and when we broke, they rebuilt us, twisted us into things no longer ourselves. A harsh, ragged sound followed, something between a sob and a laugh. They called it science, progress. We called it torment. The recording faltered, crackling with interference. Then the voice returned, quieter, as if speaking directly to them. This prison was never meant to be abandoned. The architects left because they could not control what they created. They fled, but they did not destroy this place. They left it behind, hoping time would bury their sins. We, their experiments, remained, trapped, forgotten, consumed. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier with every word. The walls pulsed faintly, their strange symbols reacting to the vibrations of the voice. Eric scanned the shadows with his rifle, his finger tight on the trigger. If you are hearing this, you have made a mistake. Leave now. Do not awaken what sleeps here. Do not... The voice broke into a series of guttural sounds, unintelligible even through the translator. Then, after a long pause, it spoke one last time. But if you stay, know this. The prison does not forgive. You will not escape. You will become like us. The recording ended abruptly. The chamber fell into silence, broken only by the sound of the team's shallow breathing. The glow from the device faded, leaving behind a cold, oppressive darkness. "Turn back," Mari said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to turn back now." Eric nodded grimly. "She's right. Whatever the hell happened here, we don't want to find out what's still lurking." "Lila, we're leaving." Lila stood frozen, her gaze fixed on the now inert device. The warning echoed in her mind, but so did her insatiable curiosity. "Don't you see?" she said, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "This is proof. Proof that we aren't alone, proof of their science, their hubris. We can't leave. Not yet." Eric stepped toward her, his tone firm. "Lila, we've already lost Ravi. This place is a tomb. Whatever answers you're looking for, they're not worth dying for." Before Lila could argue, a distant noise echoed through the corridor, a deep, wet, slithering sound as if something massive was moving through the darkness. The team froze, their lights snapping toward the source of the noise. "What the hell was that?" Mari whispered, her voice shaking. Eric raised his rifle, his eyes scanning the shadows. "We're done here. Everyone back to the shuttle now." But the corridor behind them suddenly shifted, its walls closing in with an audible groan. The prison itself seemed to move, altering its structure to cut off their escape route. "It's the prison," Lila said, her voice tinged with both wonder and terror. "It's alive, it's..." The slithering sound grew louder, accompanied by the faint clicking of claws on the metal-like floor. Eric stepped in front of the group, his rifle trained on the darkness. "Lila, if you've got a way to reopen that door, do it now." The glow of the symbols on the walls intensified, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe of their own accord. The team backed into the recording chamber, their flashlights bouncing wildly off the alien etchings. The slithering noise stopped, replaced by an eerie silence, and then, from the far end of the corridor, a shape emerged. Just a hint of movement at first, a suggestion of something too large, too unnatural. It stayed just out of the light's reach, but its presence was undeniable. "Move," Eric barked, shoving Lila toward the pedestal. "Whatever you did to open the first door, do it again." Lila scrambled to the device, her hands trembling as she frantically searched for a way to reactivate it. The noise returned, louder now, echoing through the prison with a rhythm that felt alive, like a heartbeat, like breathing. As the first clawed limb reached into the light, Eric opened fire. The corridor erupted in chaos, but it was only the beginning. The prison had come alive, and the nightmare was just beginning. The prison groaned like a living thing, its walls shifting in rhythmic pulses as though it were inhaling and exhaling. The team's footsteps echoed through the endless corridors, but even the sound of their movement felt muted, as if swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere. Every step deeper into the structure heightened their sense of unease, their lights barely piercing the suffocating darkness. Lila led the way, clutching the alien recording device tightly in her gloved hands. Behind her, Eric scanned the shadows with his rifle, every nerve in his body taut with anticipation. Mari followed close, whispering a mantra under her breath, her voice trembling with barely contained panic. "What's the plan here, Lila?" Eric asked, his tone sharp. "We've already lost Ravi, the exit's sealed, and something is hunting us. We're not equipped for this." "We have to understand it," Lila said, her voice equally tense but filled with a manic edge. "If we can figure out what it is, maybe we can find a way out." "Find a way out?" Mari hissed, her voice rising in pitch. "You don't find a way out of something like this, Lila. You survive it, or you don't." Another sound echoed through the corridor ahead of them, wet and dragging, accompanied by an intermittent clicking that set their teeth on edge. Eric raised a hand, signaling for silence. The team froze, their breathing shallow, their lights pointed at the shadows that seemed to writhe and shift on their own. Then, in the faint beam of Lila's flashlight, it appeared. At first, it was just a shape, too quick to discern. But as it moved closer, its grotesque form became horrifyingly clear. The creature stood hunched, but was easily 3 meters tall, its elongated limbs twitching unnaturally with every movement. Its skin was a patchwork of glistening flesh and metallic exoskeleton, as if it had been half-constructed, half-grown. Clawed appendages dripped with a viscous black fluid that hissed as it hit the ground, burning small craters into the metal-like floor. But it was the face, or what passed for one, that caused Mari to scream. Hundreds of eyes blinked independently, arranged in chaotic patterns across a malformed head. Some were tiny, no larger than pinpricks, while others bulged grotesquely, their irises shifting in kaleidoscopic colors. The creature's mouth was a jagged, tooth-lined maw that seemed to split its face in two, stretching wider than should have been possible. The scream drew its attention. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to, a blur of sinew and claw. Eric fired, his rifle lighting up the corridor with flashes of blue plasma. The creature screeched, a deafening bone-rattling sound, and leapt sideways onto the wall, clinging there like an insect. Eric fired again, the plasma bolts striking its carapace and ricocheting harmlessly into the walls. "Move!" he shouted, backing toward the nearest junction. "Go! Now!" Lila and Mari ran, the creature's screech echoing behind them. Eric fired another burst, but the creature lunged, its claws raking through the air mere inches from his chest. He dove to the side, rolling to his feet and sprinting after the others. The corridor twisted ahead of them, the walls narrowing as if the prison itself were conspiring to trap them. "Where are we even going?" Mari shouted, her voice cracking with panic. "Just keep running," Eric barked, his breath labored. They rounded a corner and burst into another massive chamber. This one was different. Its walls pulsed with a sickly green light, the symbols etched into them, now glowing like open wounds. At the center of the room was a pit, wide and deep, from which emanated a faint, rhythmic sound. It was breathing. "What the hell is this?" Eric muttered, skidding to a halt. Lila's gaze was drawn to the pit. She stepped closer, her flashlight trembling in her hand. At its edges, thick tendrils of alien flesh writhed like serpents, snaking out and retracting as if tasting the air. A wet, gurgling noise came from within, followed by the faintest glimpse of movement. "Lila, get back!" Eric shouted, but she didn't respond. Her light caught something in the pit, a mass of flesh, bone, and alien tissue, its form constantly shifting. Faces appeared briefly in its surface, grotesque, twisted parodies of sentient life, their mouths locked in silent screams. Tendrils extended from the mass, some ending in jagged claws, others in what looked like skeletal hands. "It's not just a creature," Lila said, her voice barely audible. "It's them, the prisoners. They're all in there." "What the hell are you talking about?" Eric demanded, dragging her back. "We need to—" The creature from the corridor leapt into the chamber, landing between them and the exit. It screeched, the sound making the walls vibrate. Mari screamed again and backed away, her hands fumbling for the portable explosive she carried in her pack. "Get behind me!" Eric shouted, unloading his rifle at the creature. The plasma bolts struck its exposed flesh, sizzling and burning small holes, but it barely seemed to notice. It charged, its claws slashing at Eric's suit, tearing through the fabric and grazing his arm. "Damn it!" he shouted, firing point blank at its head. One of its eyes burst, black ichor spraying across the floor, but the creature lashed out, knocking Eric across the chamber. He hit the wall hard, his rifle clattering out of reach. "Lila!" Mari shouted, holding up the explosive. "We can't kill it, but maybe we can slow it down. Get Eric and get out." "No," Lila said, grabbing her arm. "If you destroy this room, you could release—" Mari shoved her back. "We don't have a choice." The creature lunged at Mari just as she activated the device. With a primal scream, she threw it directly into the pit. The explosion rocked the chamber, a blinding flash of light followed by a deafening roar. The tendrils writhed violently, the mass in the pit screeching as parts of it were incinerated. The creature shrieked and staggered, its body writhing in pain, but it wasn't dead. "Go!" Mari screamed one last time as the ceiling began to collapse. Lila grabbed Eric, dragging him to his feet as debris rained down around them. Together they stumbled out of the chamber and into the shifting corridors. Behind them, the screeches of the creature and the groaning of the prison melded into a cacophony of chaos. They ran without direction, the walls shifting and twisting around them. At last, they found a narrow passageway that led upward, faint light visible at its end. As they emerged onto the Martian surface, gasping for breath, Lila turned back toward the canyon. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and a distant roar echoed from the depths. Whatever they had disturbed, it wasn't finished, and it wasn't contained. The wind screamed across the surface of Valles Marineris, carrying a choking red dust that obscured the Argus in the distance. The shuttle stood as a beacon of hope against the suffocating darkness. But it was too far. Lila knew they would never reach it, not with the prison stirring behind them and the creature still alive. She tightened her grip on Eric, whose blood streaked the Martian soil as they stumbled forward. His suit was torn, and the deep gashes in his arm glistened with a strange black ichor that wasn't entirely his own. The acid from the creature's claws was spreading through his veins, turning the skin around the wounds translucent. His breathing was ragged, his eyes half-focused. "We can't stop," Lila said, her voice trembling. "We're almost there." Eric shook his head weakly. "You have to leave me." "Don't," Lila snapped. "You're not dying here, not like Ravi, not like Mari." Mari's sacrifice replayed in her mind like a cruel loop. The blast, the collapsing chamber, the last glimpse of her friend swallowed by the inferno. And yet, it hadn't been enough. The creature had survived, and now the prison itself seemed alive, its walls clawing toward freedom, pushing something larger, something worse, to the surface. Behind them, the canyon groaned like the death throes of a wounded beast. A low, guttural roar echoed from the depths, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Lila turned back, her helmet visor filtering out the dust, and saw the prison's entrance. It had twisted open, no longer a clean geometric doorway, but an oozing, pulsating wound in the canyon wall. The creature emerged, its elongated body silhouetted against the faint green glow emanating from the depths. It was larger now. The damage it had sustained in the chamber was healing, or perhaps evolving. The shattered remnants of its carapace had grown into jagged, spiked protrusions, its limbs elongating unnaturally. Its many eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence, locking onto them with terrifying focus. "Run!" Eric rasped, shoving Lila forward with the last of his strength. "You can still make it!" "I'm not leaving you!" she shouted, tears streaming down her face. But the creature was closing in, its movements impossibly fast despite its size. The ground shook with each step, the acidic black drool from its claws sizzling as it hit the soil. Lila's mind raced. They couldn't outrun it. And even if they reached the shuttle, what then? Could they take off in time? Could they even stop it if it followed? It wasn't just a creature. It was the prison's will made flesh, a monstrous embodiment of the experiments that had destroyed the prisoners and warped their bodies into something beyond recognition. This wasn't about escape anymore. It was about stopping it, here, now, or letting it reach Earth. Lila stumbled forward, dragging Eric into the partial cover of a rock formation. His breathing was shallow now, his eyes glazing over. She ripped open his utility pack, hands trembling as she rummaged for anything that might give them a fighting chance. A flare gun, a multi-tool, some ration packs. Nothing useful. Then she saw it. Eric's last grenade. A high-yield explosive, its matte casing scratched and worn from years of use. She turned it over in her hand, feeling the weight of it. "This thing can't be killed," Eric said weakly. "You saw it." "No," Lila said, her voice hardening. "We just haven't hit it hard enough." The creature's roar tore through the air again, closer this time. Lila peeked over the rock and saw it stalking toward them. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if savoring the moment. It knew they were trapped. "Listen to me," Eric said, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. His bloodied hand left a smear on her suit. "If this doesn't work, you run. Don't let it leave this canyon." Lila nodded, her throat tight. She didn't want to say goodbye. She didn't want this to be the end. But Eric's eyes told her the truth. It was already too late for him. She helped him prop himself against the rock, his rifle at the ready. Then she stood, clutching the grenade in one hand and the flare gun in the other. Her legs felt like lead as she stepped out into the open, directly into the creature's path. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "You want me? Come and get me, you bastard!" The creature stopped, tilting its head as if studying her. Its many eyes blinked in unison, its claws twitching. Then it charged. Lila's heart pounded as she raised the flare gun and fired. The bright, burning projectile struck the creature square in the chest, causing it to recoil with an ear-splitting shriek. It staggered, its flesh bubbling where the flare had struck, but it didn't stop. It wouldn't stop. She ran, leading it toward the edge of the canyon. Her boots slipped on loose rocks as she skidded to a halt just meters from the drop. Behind her, the creature barreled forward, its roar shaking the air. Lila turned, the grenade primed in her hand. "You're not leaving this place," she whispered, more to herself than the creature. "None of us are." The creature leapt toward her, claws outstretched. At the last second, Lila dove to the side, throwing the grenade into the air. It detonated mid-leap, the shockwave hurling her to the ground. She hit the rocky surface hard, the air knocked from her lungs, her visor cracking as she rolled to the edge of the canyon. The creature roared again, this time in pain. Half its body was gone, vaporized by the explosion, but it clung to the edge of the cliff with its remaining limbs. Black ichor poured from its wounds, sizzling as it hit the ground. Lila scrambled to her feet, clutching the flare gun with shaking hands. It wasn't enough. The creature wouldn't die. Its mangled form writhed, the flesh beginning to knit itself together again, its claws digging into the rock as it pulled itself back up. Lila looked down into the canyon, the swirling green light still emanating from the prison below. The pit. The source. The only way to end it. She took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face, and turned back to Eric. He was watching her, barely conscious, but he nodded once. "Do it," he mouthed. Clutching the broken flare gun, Lila ran toward the creature. It turned to face her, its grotesque eyes locking onto her for the final time. With a scream of defiance, she leapt onto its back, driving the flare into its exposed flesh. The creature screeched, twisting violently, but she held on, dragging it toward the edge. Together, they fell. The last thing Lila saw was the green light of the prison's core rushing up to meet them. The creature's body convulsed, its many limbs reaching out in vain as it plunged into the pit. The prison roared in protest, its walls collapsing inward as the mass of flesh, tendrils, and alien machinery imploded, swallowing itself in a blinding flash of light. From the surface, Eric watched the canyon fall silent. The glow disappeared, leaving only darkness. He closed his eyes, whispering Lila's name one last time, and then silence.